Live from Washington, this is BBC News. Clashes erupt in Los Angeles. Authorities fire tear gas at protesters as tensions over immigration raids boil over. These are scenes right now live in downtown Los Angeles, where groups of demonstrators are facing off with National Guard troops and police.
If we see danger to our country and to our citizens, we'll be very, very strong in terms of law and order. It's about law and order.
I'm Sumi Somaskanda. It's good to have you with us. We start with a breaking story in Los Angeles. Protests have erupted for a third day over immigration raids in the city. Police fired tear gas and rubber bullets earlier at protesters clashing with National Guard members, just hours after President Trump deployed troops to Los Angeles to quell the growing unrest. Let's show you the current scene on the ground. You can see their protesters have gathered. There is heavy law enforcement presence as well. We have seen protesters moving down an overpass, gathering in central Los Angeles. Earlier, they were facing off against National Guard members who were in front of a federal detention facility where some of the protesters from previous days this weekend, Friday and Saturday, who had not dispersed, were being held. And these are the images that we have been looking at here. You can see police there backing up. This is Los Angeles police facing off against a big crowd of protesters. It is important to note that over the last 2 hours, we have seen this crowd of protesters gather and grow. And you can see there that line of law enforcement. They have been backing up as more people have been arriving there. But this truly has become a pretty volatile situation. We mentioned that tear gas had been deployed a little bit earlier by members of the police, but besides that, the situation has remained relatively peaceful. We have seen quite a few Mexican flags, as you can see there, waved among protesters. Donald Trump deploying the National Guard, despite the fact that it was against the explicit wishes of the governor, Gavin Newsom, the mayor, Karen Bass. Now, Gavin Newsom called it a provocation and said that it could incite protesters to have the National Guard there, a militarized presence of the National Guard. Now, you can see these protesters are really jammed together there against that line of police officers. Again, so far, things have remained relatively peaceful. We saw Donald Trump say that the National Guard can temporarily protect immigrations and customs enforcement. That is ICE, the name of the agency. It was this body, ICE, that had carried out raids on Friday in different locations in Los Angeles, particularly in neighborhoods with a heavy Hispanic community, large Hispanic community, and places like a Home Depot where migrant workers, some of whom are undocumented, are known to gather looking for day labor work. That is what our correspondent Reagan Morris was reporting to us a little bit earlier. That sparked protests. In addition to that, the arrest of a union leader who is a U.S. citizen who was accused by authorities of obstructing a law enforcement vehicle. He was detained, and that sparked real anger among some of the citizens you see here and the residents in Los Angeles. Now, in the past hour, President Trump posted on Truth Socials. We keep our eyes on these images, and it looks like just right now, before I bring that in, I just want to show you these images because it does look like police are pushing back the protesters. So you see here at the top of the image, that line of police officers moving those protesters back. This is a really large crowd. As you can see, several hundreds of protesters who have gathered. We should say the California governor, Gavin Newsom, warned protesters to remain peaceful, saying, don't give Donald Trump what he wants. And in a post on social media, he said, speak up, stay peaceful, stay calm. Let's bring in our correspondent, Peter Bowes in Los Angeles, who has been following all the latest here. Peter, just take us through what you're seeing when you're looking at these images in downtown Los Angeles.
What we're seeing now is quite a significant escalation, at least in terms of the numbers of people out on the streets. From earlier in the day, really just 2 or 3 hours ago, really small handfuls of people, outnumbered in many cases by the media. But that situation has changed very significantly just in the last couple of hours. And we're now seeing these streets full of hundreds and hundreds of people, largely on the move, facing off against the authorities, the Los Angeles police. Clearly what we're looking at, still taking the lead in trying to keep the peace. But the California National Guard also on the streets in large numbers and very prominently as well, under the orders of President Donald Trump. So what is happening now is an escalation. Clearly, the authorities will be focusing on keeping the peace. Those leaders of those communities will be focusing on trying to encourage people not to protest in violent ways so that we can get through this day without any significant escalation or trouble on the streets, or indeed injuries on the streets. But now is a tense time, mid-afternoon, a hot Sunday afternoon in Los Angeles, with a lot of the day still to go. Nighttime often is the time when these situations can get out of control, and the authorities will be working together, and that will include the federal authorities as well, to try to keep these crowds, these angry crowds, angry at the politics of the situation, to keep them under control.
All right, Peter, thank you very much for that assessment. We'll let you go now. It looks like we just saw someone on the ground there being detained, someone who was carrying a flag. Obviously, we're getting an aerial view here, so we can't see exactly what is happening, but it appears that we did see one of the protesters who had perhaps crossed that line or come from the other side. We're not exactly sure from this image, being detained on the ground there. But you can just see just what the potential for escalation is here on the ground. You have protesters packed together there. There's one thin line of law enforcement. Now, of course, we do know that Donald Trump did deploy 2,000 National Guard troops to Los Angeles. We saw a line of them earlier carrying riot shields with the words National Guard around a federal detention facility. But at the moment, this is what we're seeing. And, you know, we did see Donald Trump write a little bit earlier on Truth Social that a once great American city, Los Angeles, has been invaded and occupied by illegal aliens and criminals. And just, you know, we want to apologize. You know, as we've been showing some of these images, we have heard some offensive language, and we have also seen some images of some violent scuffles. We, of course, are looking at these pictures with you live, so this is all unfolding in front of our eyes. But we want to bring in a guest as we're looking at these images, as you're seeing police now pushing back protesters. We have Congressman Adriano Espilayat with us. He's the chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us. We're seeing images of these protests really growing. Tell us what you make of what we're seeing.
Well, again, this is ICE and Trump's mass deportation efforts that don't distinguish between an undocumented person, someone with a green card, with a work permit, or even an American citizen, from being scooped up and put in some type of a detention center. I recently visited Mexico, where I saw a family with 4 U.S.-born children that were deported, including a 10-year-old little girl with a serious cancerous brain tumor that must get treatment in the U.S. So this doesn't exempt anyone. This is an aggressive stand. The local authorities said that they were ready and in control, and yet Trump calls on the National Guard, and it somewhat incites other people. And so this is troubling.
And we are, Congressman, seeing some people being detained there on the ground by police officers. Donald Trump, his administration, saying what is troubling is the skirmishes, the violence towards ICE agents. What do you think of that?
I don't think that's the case. Let me tell you, I went to 26 Federal Plaza today with Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, where we heard of a situation on a Sunday where people are coming in for a regularly scheduled appointment. Not that they regularly schedule appointment on Sundays, but they're calling them in today to go there. and their cases are heard and dismissed. And as they walk out, they're arrested and they're sent to a detention center. When I went to the Elizabeth, New Jersey detention center, most of the people there were complying with what they agreed they would do. The rules and regulations, they were within the parameters of the rules and regulations of making an appointment with ICE or making their court appearance. Yet, we see how they're readily dismissed these cases, expedited removal. And when they go outside to the hallways, ICE, in some cases, masked, you can't even see their faces, cuffs you, arrests you, and sends you to a detention center. No due process whatsoever.
So, Congressman, can I jump in there and ask you, are you concerned about violence? However, we did mention earlier that there were skirmishes that appeared to get a bit out of hand over the weekend, Friday and Saturday, of course, most of them remaining largely peaceful. But this appears to be what the president is referring to when he says that there are unlawful mobs taking to the streets.
Well, no one is for violence. No one is against someone that committed a crime, went through their court proceeding and was found to be guilty of violent crime, that they're sent back home. No one is against that. But we see that the atmosphere is charged, and rather than take the lead, as the president should do, to provide leadership and calm things down and unite people, we feel that that is not the case, that he is dividing people. And as such, then creating an atmosphere that leads to this kinds of conflict. We reject the violence, and we ask people time and time again that they have the right to protest, but they must protest peacefully. And so we encourage people consistently that they must protest and exercise their right to protest in a peaceful manner. But you have a leader in the nation that's dividing people. He's not uniting people. He's even dividing the White House. He has a spat with Elon Musk. He can't have a working relationship for more than several months with anybody. So obviously, this is really troubling.
Congressman, I understood there was some reporting that the Hispanic caucus will be meeting to discuss what is happening in Los Angeles. I mean, what would your caucus like to see happen now in Los Angeles as we see a growing number of people out in the streets?
Well, I had conversations with some of my colleagues last night, with 4 of them that were there at the detention center at the ICE facility, and they were not allowed in. We went to 26 Federal Plaza today also, Congresswoman Velasquez and myself, and we were not allowed to go to the 10th floor where allegedly they are holding people. People are going into these centers and not coming out. And so we're concerned, and we want to hear from them so they can give us a report as to what has actually occurred. And then we will proceed as a caucus, united, with one strong position for due process and for the best interests of America.
And Congressman, we have seen President Trump float the idea of sending the military, active duty military, to Los Angeles. He said he would have troops everywhere. He was asked what qualifies as an insurrection, and he said the bar is what I think it is. What do you think of the prospect of the military being sent for these protests that we are seeing grow very large in Los Angeles?
It will be a provocation to see Army personnel in war gear in an urban city in America. That's a provocation by the current president, who seems not to have the ability to unite America. Rather, he's bent on dividing it.
Okay, Congressman, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thank you for having me.
We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right, we're going to keep looking at these images. We were talking there with the congressman about President Trump and the comments that he has made. He made a few comments a little bit earlier in the day on the tarmac as he was heading back to Washington. Let's see if we can play that clip of President Trump speaking a short while ago.
Well, we're going to have troops everywhere. We're not going to let this happen to our country. We're not going to let our country be torn apart like it was under Biden and his auto pen.
What's the bar for sending Marines?
The bar is what I think it is. I mean, if we see danger to our country and to our citizens, will be very, very strong in terms of law and order. It's about law and order.
Sending active Marines on the table, sir. Secretary Hegseth.
We're going to see what we need. We'll send whatever we need to make sure there's law and order.
Mr. President, do you foresee those protests spreading to other cities, Chicago, New York, for example, in the next few days?
We're going to be watching it very closely. And when they spit at people, you know, they spit. That's their new thing. They spit, and worse, you know what they throw at them, right? And when that happens, I have a little statement. They say, they spit, we hit. And I told them, nobody's going to spit on our police officers. Nobody's going to spit on our military, which they do as a common thing. They get up to them this far away, and then they start spitting in their face. That happens, they get hit very hard.
What are the rules of engagement for federal troops?
We'll see what happens. If we think there's a serious insurrection or less than that, we're going to have law and order. Very important.
How would you define an insurrection?
You have to really just have to look at the site. You have to see what's happening. Last night in Los Angeles, we watched it very closely. There was a lot of violence there. There was a lot of violence, and it could have gotten much worse. And you have an incompetent governor. Just take a look at the train stations that he's building. Like 20 times over budget. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. So I did call him the other night. I said, look, you got to take care of this. Otherwise, I'm sending in the troops. That's what we did. Thank you very much. You have a question for Marco? Question for Marco?
I was curious if California officials could face federal charges if they stand in the way of the deportation. Something that Bowman may have suggested.
If officials stand in the way of law and order, yeah, they will face charges. Thank you very much.
That again was President Trump on the tarmac a short while ago. He was leaving New Jersey. He was at his golf club in Bedminster over the weekend and heading back to Washington, D.C. Now, we have seen reaction, of course, from local officials and also national officials who support and have been criticizing the decision by Donald Trump to send National Guard troops in. And in a joint statement, several Democratic governors condemned the president's decision. They called it an alarming abuse of power. And they pledged to stand with California Democrat Gavin Newsom, who was asking people to remain calm this afternoon. Meanwhile, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass issued this statement on Sunday saying deploying federalized troops on the heels of these raids is a chaotic escalation. The fear people are feeling in our city right now is very real. This is the last thing that our city needs, and I urge protesters to remain peaceful. Los Angeles will always stand with everyone who calls our city home. Now, we've been talking a bit about the impact of sending National Guard troops to Los Angeles and also the prospect of the military being deployed as well. We can speak to Javed Ali now, national security analyst, former part of the U.S. National Security Council under the previous Trump administration. Javed, great to have you on. And just so you know, we're continuing to look at all these live pictures that are coming into us, a really volatile situation on the ground there. But just first of all, can you characterize to us your impression of the decision to send the National Guard to Los Angeles against the wishes of the governor?
Well, Sumi, great to be with you. And based on the situation as it's developed, there actually is precedent for what President Trump has authorized. The last time any U.S. president federalized the state National Guard without the consent of the state governor. Normally, the National Guard troops are under the direct control of the state governor, was in March 1965 due to the segregation policies in Alabama under then Governor George Wallace. So President Lyndon Johnson made that decision at that time. So that's the last time we've seen something similar. So almost, well, literally 60 years ago. And then with respect to the use of federal troops, that there's also precedent for that in the Los Angeles riots of 1992. But the difference between then and now is that the California governor actually requested President Bush then in very early May 1st, 1992 to mobilize federal troops in California. So a little bit of a different situation.
What about the question that's been asked? We understand reporters have pointed to the fact that a defense official confirmed that 500 Marines have been put on prepare to deploy orders. I mean, that would be unprecedented.
Well, again, I'm not sure it is unprecedented because going back to the 1992 Los Angeles riots
Right.
example, that when that request was made from Governor Pete Wilson on May 1st, 1992, to then President Bush, part of the federal troops that were mobilized to then go to Los Angeles to support the Los Angeles Police Department and LA Sheriff's Department were about 1,500 Marines from Camp Pendleton, about 100 miles south of Los Angeles, and then about 2,000 active duty Army troops from Fort Irwin, a little farther away from Los Angeles as well. So again, there's precedence for this even on the federal troop side, and ironically, in Los Angeles, going back to the LA riots from 1992.
Can you tell us a bit about the interplay between local law enforcement and federal troops and agents who have come in, and just how they do and don't cooperate?
Yeah, this is another really complex issue at play. So going back to the 1992 Los Angeles riots example, because the circumstances were different, the California governor requested the mobilization of federal troops, but to support or interact with the California National Guard and collectively for all those military forces to support the Los Angeles Police Department and LA Sheriff's Department. This seems to be a very different situation where you've got the California National Guard being federalized, the potential for the mobilization of active duty troops, which may include Marines and Army personnel in California or elsewhere. But it sounds like neither LAPD or the LA Sheriff's Department is asking for that support. So that is a very different circumstance than 1992, and how these elements will all interact with on the ground, that is also not yet clear, and it could be even more chaotic than one could imagine.
Yeah, and Javed, before we let you go, as you look at this very complex set of issues that you just described, I mean, how difficult do you see the situation right now in trying to bring tensions down?
Well, hopefully this will lead to some kind of de-escalation and with the show of force, and perhaps that's the strategy with the decision by President Trump. But again, so many things can happen once you have that many folks on the ground from the military, and they have to have very clear guidelines in terms of their rules of engagement. What are they allowed to do and not to do? How do you commingle active duty troops and the California National Guard that may not have worked together before? So even on the military side, it could be very complex. And going back to how will they interact with state and local law enforcement, that is an open question right now. So there could be a lot going on until things get resolved and we have a de-escalation in place.
Okay, Javed Ali, as always, great to have you on. Thanks for your analysis on this moving story today.
All right, thank you.
Okay, we're still looking, of course, at these images as they play out on our screens here. Downtown Los Angeles, you can see there it is just about 3:30 p.m. and our correspondent Peter Bose has been telling us it's a hot and sunny afternoon there. Protests have flared up again. We've seen demonstrators protesting against immigration raids. They've been facing off with law enforcement. Things have remained mostly calm, mostly peaceful. A short while ago, a few hours ago, we did see National Guard's troops deploy some tear gas to disperse a line of protesters. But it is a very tense situation. As you can see, a massive crowd of protests, several hundreds, if not thousands. We have not seen the aerial image for a while now, but from what we've seen, a lot of people have showed up for these protests. And we have, of course, been taking these live images. We've heard some offensive language. We want to apologize for some of that you might have heard. We've seen a few scuffles with a line of police, but that is indeed what we've been looking at. And you can see these images there as protesters are gathered and law enforcement on hand as well. As we're looking at these images, I want to bring in our next guest, Juan Proaño. He is the CEO of the League of United Latin American Citizens. Juan, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you. I understand that you're on your way to Los Angeles. Just tell us what you make of what we're seeing.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's very sad to see the current state of Los Angeles, but it's our belief that this was something that was planned and orchestrated by the Trump administration, really going into a sanctuary city, with the militarization of an immigration enforcement in order to really kind of sort of attack, if you will, a peaceful city. Um, Immigrants who are hardworking immigrants, who are not criminals, going into the garment factories, if you will, detaining over 200 immigrants in the Roybal Federal Building. It's unprecedented. We've never seen anything like that at all.
Juan, I just want to bring to you what we saw the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, say earlier. She said, if Gavin Newsom, the governor, was doing his job, our ICE agents would not be injured and attacked while doing their jobs and carrying out immigration enforcement. She's pointing to the fact that there were scuffles between protesters and ICE agents. What's your response to that?
Well, obviously there's outrage in the community. But, not all of the protesters are criminals. Most of them, and as you've seen today, basically are peaceful. And I would also like to point to the fact that Paramount is not Los Angeles proper. So you're actually calling in the Federal Reserve into Los Angeles when it actually is not part of Paramount, which is in a completely different city, separate and apart from Los Angeles.
I just want to come back to this point, Juan, because you're saying that you believe this was an orchestrated attempt with the ICE agents coming to Los Angeles County, not proper Los Angeles City. And the president and his administration say this is really those protests against those ICE agents and violence carried out against those ICE agents that sparked all of this.
Well, it's an escalation. And so we've actually seen that, not just in Los Angeles, we've seen that in Arizona, we've seen that in Texas as well. It's part of their efforts to ramp up to 3,000 deportations per day. But what we're seeing is that they actually really don't have the capacity in order to do this. The detention centers are already full and overrun. They clearly do not have enough judges to be able to actually take a look and review these cases, and they really are escalating the pace at which these deportations are happening. What we found was those 200 immigrants that were being detained in a courthouse building where there was no bed, there was no medical resources, there was inadequate food and water, and within 24 to 48 hours, some of those detainees were already moved to Texas and prepared for deportation as well.
Juan, what are members of the community in Los Angeles saying in particular about these protests and what has sparked them to come to the streets? I mean, we are seeing several hundreds of people, if not thousands, out in the streets in Los Angeles today.
Well, and there's complete outrage, outrage at the fact that, again, these are hardworking people, many of them without any criminal record at all whatsoever, really doing important jobs, but simple jobs to serve the community. These are not criminals. This is not really what he actually campaigned on. He did campaign on mass deportations, but he campaigned on the idea that he was only going to be targeting criminals in the United States. And so, this is, in effect, what you would call gaslighting, essentially going into a community, a peaceful community with militarization of an ICE force, if you will, for the purpose of exactly what's happening today, is inciting of these protests. And again, they are peaceful protests, but you're going to continue to see those protests. Tomorrow, there's one that's planned at SCIU to get David Huerta out of jail. He was detained, he was tased, he was arrested. This is a community leader, long-standing community leader who's out there exercising his freedom of speech, his freedom to protest, who was arrested and detained as well.
What is your message as we said, I understand, heading to Los Angeles? What is your message to protesters there as we see more and more gather, obviously calling for David Huerta and others who were detained to be released, but also advocating on behalf of the migrant community? We've seen a lot of local officials warning, remain calm and remain peaceful.
Latinos are calm. We are peaceful. It is really an incredible community with outpouring of support and love. I mean, I've actually seen images today of immigrants helping ICE agents who are overheated, for example, from all the activity that's going out on the streets themselves. But our message to them is that to keep it peaceful, okay? Exercise your right to speech, exercise your right to protest, but effectively to keep it peaceful. But we also want to make sure that, the civil rights of the Latino community are not trampled. There are a lot of folks that are actually being harassed by ICE agents. These are warrantless raids. This is racial profiling where they're stopping you and asking you for your papers to prove citizenship. when you've not committed a crime, where there is absolutely no reason for them to stop you and actually try and surmise if you were born in the United States or if you're a U.S. born citizen, or even if you're an immigrant who has entered the United States illegally and is on the process for asylum or refugee status.
Okay, Juan, really good to have you on the program. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us here on BBC News today.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and we are still, of course, looking at those live images from Los Angeles as protests have flared up again, originally sparked by immigration raids in the city of Los Angeles. We're seeing a standoff between the state of California and the Trump administration and President Trump himself. And in fact, President Trump a little bit earlier posted on Truth Social a statement where he was referring to these protests directly. And he said, a once great American city, Los Angeles, has been invaded and occupied by illegal aliens and criminals. Now violent insurrectionist mobs are swarming and attacking our federal agents to try and stop our deportation operations. He went on to say, but these lawless riots only strengthen our resolve. I am directing Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and Attorney General Pam Bondi, in coordination with all other relevant departments and agencies, to take all such action necessary to liberate Los Angeles from the migrant invasion and put an end to these migrant riots. Order will be restored. The illegals will be expelled. Los Angeles will be set free. So that statement on Truth Social a short while ago from the president. Let's bring our Los Angeles correspondent Peter Bowes back in. Peter, good to have you back. And I know you've been watching all of the back and forth, but surely that language that we've seen from President Trump there will be seen by many on the ground in Los Angeles protesting as another provocation.
Yes, and this has been a boiling pot of tension that's been growing ever since Donald Trump returned to the White House. A boiling pot as it relates to this issue of immigration, of immigration status of many people who've been in this city for many, many years, and the way in which they are treated, the way in which they are seen, and most importantly, their future, how it looks under the Trump administration. It's been that boiling point that's been growing and now is clearly in a very dramatic, unsavory way, is spilling over onto the streets. And over the last few hours, we've seen quite significantly an increased number of people. We can now see clearly hundreds and hundreds of people in the streets in downtown Los Angeles who are protesting largely, I would say 99%. This has been a peaceful day in Los Angeles, but there have been skirmishes that have looked particularly dangerous and frightening and violent. We know that the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department, are still prominent in terms of the effort to keep the peace, but the National Guard, the California National Guard, under the orders of the president, are also very prominently on the streets as well. And many officials here say that very fact is raising tensions even further.
Indeed, and we see here again this line of law enforcement facing off against protesters. They've been going back and forth, backing off and then moving forward, pushing protesters back. Clearly, Peter, a very tense situation. Remind us again how we got here, how things started on Friday and into Saturday.
This started on Friday with those raids by the Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency, ICE, which had been expected, and to the surprise of so many people in this city, hadn't actually happened before Friday. We know there have been raids in other places around the country. Los Angeles has been relatively quiet, but then bang on Friday, premises, businesses raided by the authorities to detain those individuals who they believe are in this country, are in this city illegally, and have been detained. And that's why the focus is around a detention centre in downtown Los Angeles. And the protests started fairly soon after that, and the core issue, and we're seeing it on many of the billboards and posters of these protesters, is that they want ICE out of town. They don't believe that they have a justifiable role in doing what they are doing with the force that they are doing it. It shouldn't come as a surprise because Donald Trump heralded it, he talked about it, he campaigned on it, and some would say he won the election in some part on this policy of clamping down hard on illegal immigration. But now we're seeing the fruits of that complicated by the fact that this is a political issue that divides many people. It even divides the Hispanic community in Los Angeles. I know members of that community who actually support the president, believe that he's doing the correct thing in trying to sift out those migrants who are in this country illegally. Others will say that all migrants serve a valuable purpose in the community and the business of Los Angeles and Greater California as well.
Okay, Peter, thank you very much for that assessment and that reminder again of how we got here to this standoff that we're seeing a massive crowd of protesters in Los Angeles. Peter, we'll come back to you in a little bit, and we're going to continue to keep our eye there on those images in Los Angeles as we've seen these protests flare up again, as we saw Donald Trump announce the deployment of National Guard troops, federalized National Guard troops to Los Angeles to quell the unrest, as he said, vowing that law and order will be restored. We saw the governor of California saying that it was an inflammatory move. The same sentiment from the mayor of Los Angeles, both saying there's plenty of law enforcement to be able to handle the protests that have been sparked as part of these immigration raids that took place over the weekend that Peter was just describing. We're going to keep our eye on those images. Any developments that are happening there, we'll bring them to you as soon as they come into us. You can see that we have a live page running on our website as well with the latest updates. But we're going to come back to those in a moment. We do have some other breaking news coming to us now from the Middle East. We are hearing that an alarm has sounded on an aid flotilla heading for Gaza. The team says that life jackets are on and they're preparing for interception. Israel had earlier instructed its military to stop the ship. It's carrying pro-Palestinian activists, and Israel said that it would stop it from reaching Gaza. Now, the campaigners include Greta Thunberg, the famous climate activist. They say that their aim is to break the Israeli blockade on the territory and deliver humanitarian aid. The defense minister, Israel Katz, said that their crew, 12 people strong, that was on this ship, this flotilla, should turn back, that Israel would act against any attempt to breach its blockade. And this vessel departed from Sicily on Friday. It's carrying humanitarian aid. You'll remember that this has been one of the most central issues discussed in the conflict at the moment is the inability to get large-scale aid into Gaza. The flotilla said that they were prepared for the possibility of an Israeli interception, of an Israeli attack. And so we're going to continue to watch these headlines coming into us from the Middle East, of course, on that flotilla being intercepted, as we understand, in heading towards Gaza. Israel also saying that it had warned them ahead of time. All right. So that is the breaking news from the Middle East. We're going to come back to the big breaking story here in the U.S. that we've been following at this hour. The protests erupting in Los Angeles again over immigration raids that happened over the weekend. Important to note, they have remained mostly peaceful. We've seen a few small skirmishes until now, but a large law enforcement presence and a large protester presence. I want to bring in my next guest, Sarah Mehta, the Deputy Director of Government Affairs at the Equality Division for the ACLU. Very good to have you with us. Just give us a sense of how you assess where things stand right now with protesters squaring off against law enforcement at a time where we've seen the National Guard as well deployed to Los Angeles.
Thank you. Well, I think this is an alarming situation and one that has been escalated and essentially manufactured by the federal government. We've seen over the last few days in LA and really over the last several weeks around the United States, federal immigration officers, making increasingly aggressive arrests and raids in our communities, detaining parents and young children, longtime residents, visa holders, putting them to really appalling conditions. We've heard from the few members of Congress that were able to see people arrested in these raids that they have families being held from 12 to 24 hours in the dark with no water. The people of Los Angeles, understandably, were really frustrated by the incredibly aggressive actions by ICE, which unfortunately are not an isolated incident. And they rallied to support their community. The response from ICE has been tear gas, and now from the president, the military. It's a really alarming escalation and one that the president is really responsible for. He needs to be held accountable for putting us in a really dangerous situation in our communities.
The president says it is not him who is responsible here, but the protesters who have prevented ICE agents, federal agents, from being able to detain those who are in the country undocumented. And we have seen the press secretary say that violent mobs have attacked ICE officers and federal law enforcement agents carrying out basic deportation orders in Los Angeles. She says these operations are essential to halting and reversing the, quote, invasion of illegal criminals into the U.S. What's your response to that?
The protests are obviously a pretext. This president has promised to put troops on the streets since his campaign. Federal immigration authorities, again, are really taking these really aggressive actions against longtime residents wearing masks, using violence in our communities. This is a situation that they are creating in order to really go after the president's own obsessive campaign of deportations and terror. Since our nation's founding, there have been very strict limits and separation between the roles of the military and civilian authorities. That's an important legal tradition for good reason. We don't want the military to be engaged in partisan politics. We want our National Guard to focus on critical activities that they are trained for, protecting the communities from natural disasters. They're not supposed to be the president's private army going after protesters or hunting down immigrant families.
We're continuing to watch these images as we speak to you, but we have seen President Trump say, we'll send whatever we need to make sure there's law and order. You're just referencing, the National Guard troops and the military there. There is precedent for this. What is your concern as to what we could see play out over this afternoon in Los Angeles as we see such a large presence of people?
Well, this is the first time a president has made an order like this, activating the National Guard to a state without the governor's request or consent since 1965. And that time, it was President Johnson who was sending troops to Alabama to protect civil rights demonstrators. What Trump is doing here is the exact opposite. He is using the National Guard, again, as his own private army to intimidate and punish communities that are exercising their rights. This is bad for the military. This is not the role that they are trained to play. It's bad for morale. It's bad for their military readiness. And again, for the trust that we need to have in the military when they are there to support communities in things like natural disasters. But right now, having troops that are not trained for immigration enforcement with weapons on our streets, that is a very dangerous situation for everybody involved.
How do you de-escalate at this point as we're looking at these images of lines of law enforcement and large crowds of protesters who have gathered, obviously, on behalf of the migrant community? How do you de-escalate the situation right now?
Well, I have to hope that also troops don't want to be doing this either. We know from the many times that National Guard troops have been deployed, for example, to the southern border in a much more limited role, really just for transport and for other logistical operations, that morale has been very low. People don't want to be taken out of their community and put in their streets to be used against their community members. So I'm hoping that we'll see both the National Guard and other members of the military speak up and against this, that they will do what they can to make sure that officers are using their best judgment and not getting overly involved in situations like this. But again, these are troops that are not trained for being on the streets to do law enforcement. These are troops that are often trained for war, which is why it is such an alarming situation.
Okay, Sarah, really interesting to get your perspective on this story tonight. Thank you very much for joining us, Sarah Mehta. And we are, of course, going to keep our eye on those images. We have been watching over the course of the last 3 hours, really, as those protests have grown significantly over the course of the early afternoon into the afternoon in Los Angeles. And there you see it. We've been watching different aspects of these images. We had an aerial view really showing several hundreds of people marching together to one central location where they were facing off against police officers. We also saw a little bit earlier in the day the National Guard troops who had arrived. We know that 2,000 had been deployed. We saw a line of them a little bit earlier around a federal detention facility where some of those who had been detained from the protests over the weekend on Friday and Saturday were being held. So we're going to watch these images, of course, bring you any updates as soon as they come to us, anything moves on that. And you can, of course, stay on top of this with our website as well, bbc.com/news. But we also want to bring you another big international story we're following, which is the continuing war in Ukraine. And President Zelensky says that the Trump administration has sent 20,000 missiles that were promised to Ukraine to the Middle East. The Ukrainian president said that former U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin had agreed to provide the missiles to counter Russian drones. Now, President Zelensky was speaking in an interview with ABC's Martha Raddatz. He pushed back on President Trump's assertion that Vladimir Putin wants peace. Russia continues to make gains, meanwhile, in eastern Ukraine. The Russian Defense Ministry released video on Sunday purporting to show its troops planting a flag in Zoria, a village in Ukraine's Donetsk region. The BBC has not been able to independently verify the date or location of that video. But let's talk about these latest lines with Bill Taylor, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. He's with us in our studio. Great to see you again, Ambassador.
Sumi, it's very good to be here.
Let's start with those first lines of missiles that have been promised to Ukraine being sent to the Middle East. So what do we know about this equipment and how critical it might be for the Ukrainians?
Sumi, it's extremely critical. What they say over and over is that the interceptors for the Patriot missiles, to be able to knock down Russian missiles coming in, are crucial for them. And they've got some. And others seem to be coming, but the Ukrainians are counting on a continuous flow of these.
What has the Trump administration to date said about the efforts to continue to arm Ukraine? I mean, are shipments still going to be sent? We know, of course, some of what was previously agreed in the last assistance bill to Ukraine will be sent.
And that continues to flow. The weapons that were promised earlier, that were appropriated funds and are moving in the pipeline. The new administration, the Trump administration, has not said anything to counter that, to stop that. There are these reports of a diversion of some weapons that might have gone, but the flow continues at this point.
And intelligence sharing as well, we should say.
Intelligence continues as well. Very important. That's as important as the weapons is the ability for the Ukrainians to use and see what's coming at them.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said, look, nothing has changed. We're still sharing the weapons and intelligence with Ukraine. However, we saw that language from President Trump this week, comparing President Zelensky and Putin to two children fighting on a playground. What does that tell us about where things stand in terms of U.S. involvement?
The United States has the ability to bring that fight to a close, to a stop, to get to a ceasefire. President Trump has leverage. The United States has the ability to put pressure on Putin to stop, but only with the United States pressure and European pressure. Together with the continued fight of the Ukrainians, will Putin realize that he can't win? He, as you say, he's making small gains at enormous cost. But if he realizes, when he realizes that the Americans are not going to give up, the Ukrainians are never going to give up, and the Europeans are still there, Putin will have to conclude that he can't win this war.
But to the point of the small gains, it will be, at this point, quite difficult for Ukraine as well to push Russia back from those positions.
It will, and the Ukrainians have grudgingly accepted that. That is, they agree that for now, temporarily, at least as far as they can see right now, they don't have the ability, the military capability, to push the Russians out of the 20%, 19% of the Ukrainian territory that the Russians now occupy. So they are willing to accept, only temporarily, that the Russians are going to be on that 19% of their territory.
Where does all of this, you think, leave Ukrainian President Zelensky? He has, of course, made many overtures to the Trump administration to continue aid and to put pressure on Russia. To this point, we haven't seen that pressure on Russia, at least publicly.
We haven't seen it yet, but as you've reported, Senator Graham has some 81, 82 co-sponsors on a bill, Republicans and Democrats in the Senate, on a bill that would put 500% tariffs on nations that buy oil from Russia. That would be a major blow to the Russian economy.
I just want to follow up on that. Why would that be a major blow? Because the point has been made in 3.5 years of war, sanctions and punitive measures on Russia have not had the intended effect of deterring the president of Russia.
It has not had the effect of deterring it, but right now the Russian economy is more vulnerable than it has been in those 3 years. Right now, the civilian side of the Russian economy is doing very badly. And this pressure, this removal of these revenues that coming into the Russian by the sale of oil are very necessary. And if those get cut off, that's a problem for the Russians.
Before we let you go, Ambassador, looking ahead to both a G7 summit, a NATO summit, where we're going to see, President Trump also on hand, what do you think can be achieved in these international arenas?
A clear demonstration that the G7 and NATO will continue to support Ukraine going forward. And it's important for the Americans to be part of that consensus. If that is there, if that determination on the part of the international community, G7 and NATO, then that can have a real effect on Putin's understanding of how he can lose this war.
Ambassador, it's always great to get your analysis. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sumi.
Okay. We're going to come back now to the situation in Los Angeles. We're going to bring you those live pictures we've been following the last few hours. There you see these aerial images, really dramatic aerial images. You see a large law enforcement presence, Los Angeles Police Department, and you see a large number of protesters. Protests, again, flaring up in Los Angeles. The demonstrators have been protesting against immigration raids in their community, in southern Los Angeles in particular. And this really escalated, we saw overnight, after we saw Donald Trump, the president, say he was deploying National Guard troops to Los Angeles. He said to restore law and order. Now, at the same time, we have seen the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, reject that characterization. He said that the situation was under control. And there you see on that overpass there, just the sheer number of people who have gathered. Peter Bose is still with us, our Los Angeles correspondent. Peter, just tell us what you've been tracking, looking at from there as these protests continue.
Well, as you've been saying, clearly these crowds are increasing by the hour. We're now looking at hundreds, potentially thousands of people on the streets of downtown Los Angeles. A lot of attention focused around the detention building, where it's believed that some of those migrants arrested over the last couple of days, particularly on Friday, during the raids that really started all of this. They're believed to be being held at this building. But this is now a protest over the politics of the situation. It's a protest that is focused on the words of Donald Trump that we've been hearing from him in the last few hours, but the actions of the president in particular, and that is ordering the National Guard, the California National Guard, to be brought in and to appear on the streets to bring this situation, a situation that Donald Trump sees as being out of control, and one that the local agencies, and he blames the local political leaders for this, city leaders and state leaders, for not being able to control a situation that's spiraling out of control. Now, clearly people here, many people here, see this in a very different way. It isn't seen as being out of control. These protests have largely been peaceful over the last couple of days. Yes, we've seen some skirmishes. We've seen some very frightening moments and situations where the protesters and the police have clashed. These are Los Angeles police officers in riot gear. The National Guard clearly very prominent on the streets as well. And we're seeing, well, we're looking at the moment at a freeway in downtown Los Angeles. It is jam-packed with cars. Sunday afternoon is always a busy time. And it looks like we're seeing the police actually walking amongst those cars. So a frightening situation for people on the streets, but also the drivers of those vehicles who've perhaps inadvertently been caught up in this.
Yeah, Peter, we understand that those police officers who are walking among the cars, they're approaching those protesters who have essentially stopped traffic there on that freeway. It could be that they're going to look to clear those protesters out of the road at the moment. Just give us a sense of where this is in Los Angeles and what we're looking at.
We're looking at largely downtown Los Angeles, and just to clarify it is sometimes a tactic of protesters to try to cause disruption on the freeways by invading in this way. It's something that we've seen before in Los Angeles and something that the authorities are well accustomed to dealing with. And this is a scenario that we see played out in this city every now and then, not always associated with a political issue like the one that we're dealing with at the moment. Sometimes after a major sporting event, sometimes inexplicably violence will erupt on the streets, and we see very similar scenes to this. The reason perhaps for mentioning that is that these are situations that the local police are used to dealing with, and they have been arguing now for the last certainly 24 hours that they don't need any assistance, that they are professional, they know what they're doing, and they have the resources and the personnel to deal with a mass invasion, it seems, at least on this freeway, of people. Well, maybe not a mass invasion, it's a relatively small group of people, maybe a couple of hundred, but it's a scenario that they're used to dealing with, they would say, without the help of the National Guard.
And Peter, just in the last minute or two before we have to take a break, the California governor has continued to post on social media, hasn't he, urging protesters to remain peaceful as they face off.
Yes, the governor's been urging those protesters who city officials all along have said have a right to protest and express their opinions, but to keep their protests peaceful. And we've also heard this from various leaders, union leaders, from leaders.
Yeah, Peter, I just want to interrupt you because it sounds like we are hearing their police perhaps using stun grenades. That's what it sounds like, to clear these protesters from the roads there.
Yes.
Yep, just as you were speaking. Indeed.
That's right.
Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Yes, I'm hearing and seeing the same thing. And again, this is exactly, without being there, it's difficult to tell what kind of explosions these are. But generally speaking, in situations like this, and we saw it during the college protests of last year, when they want to try to disperse a crowd quickly, they will set off these loud bangs that will disperse people pretty quickly.
And Peter, we're just going to...
It's a tactic used by law enforcement to move a crowd very quickly.
And we're just seeing here the protesters are throwing from the overpass. There's some fireworks. Peter, sorry to interrupt you. We're just going to have to take a short break and come back at the top of the hour. But Peter Bowes, great to have your analysis there from Los Angeles. We'll be back here with more of this on BBC News in just a few moments, so don't go away. Stay with us.
Hello there. Some big changes on the way over the week ahead, as we'll see in just a moment. But we start the new week with the cloud increasing from the Atlantic, and that's going to bring some rain, mainly for the northern half of the UK. Some early sunshine, but it will cloud over quite quickly. We'll see the odd shower breaking out ahead of this more persistent rain coming into Northern Ireland, and it just gets wetter through the day in Scotland and then later in Northern England. Further south, few if any showers, quite a bit of cloud, best of the sunshine along the south coast of England, but beginning to warm up a little in the south, but a cool day underneath that cloud and rain in the north. And that weather system takes most of the rain out into the North Sea overnight. The tail end of this weather front then heading southwards on Tuesday. That's why we're seeing this cloud and just a little bit of rain from that cloud for a while, heading across Wales, Midlands and southern England. But further north, quite a turnaround really, because here it's generally dry, more in the way of sunshine, just one or two showers, mainly in the northeast of Scotland for a while. So warming up in Scotland and Northern Ireland up to 18 degrees, and we could get temperatures a little bit higher across southern parts of England and Wales, even though there's more cloud. What happens after that, though, is low pressure to the west, high pressure to the east of the UK. That means we get a southerly wind, and that's going to lift the temperatures. It's going to get warmer by day and by night, more humid as well, so that by the time we get to a Thursday, there could be some rain, which may be heavy and thundery.
Donald Trump's second term has brought sweeping changes both at home and on the international stage.
They charge us, we charge them.
Join our teams for the latest developments and reaction. See the headlines as they happen with breaking news alerts on the News app. And get in-depth coverage on bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.
I think the first signs that I wanted to be a journalist were, as a kid, I started making pretend reports. I always liked asking a lot of questions. I've had a lot of different jobs in journalism. What I've learned is that it's always about the people. The wildfires was a story I was living through myself.
It is really hard to comprehend how life is ever going to get back to normal.
Going to bed at night, not really knowing what I was going to wake up to. Fires were burning right around us, so we were having to take split-second decisions about how to gather pictures and tell this story. I knew thousands of people were leaving their homes and were probably never going to get to go back to them. And in the middle of that chaos, I had to find ways to talk to people about what they were experiencing.
That was my house.
It's all gone. I think hearing one person's story helps viewers trust what they're hearing. Because when you can empathise, it helps you get an understanding of the bigger picture.
Ready for a lively debate? Sometimes our panellists agree, and sometimes they don't. There's people with a lot to say, and others who just say enough. Some who want to ask the hard questions, some who want to avoid them, and some who think they have the answers. They're guaranteed to keep you entertained, whether you agree or not. Politics Live, tomorrow at 12:15 on BBC Two and iPlayer.